This is my Swiss Army knife. It's a knife that I bought about 15 years ago, and it's a knife that has, of course, a blade in it, but there's also a screwdriver, a magnifying glass, a can opener, a pair of scissors, stuff like that. This is my most used tool of any kind. It's the most used tool across all my knives. It's the most used tool across all my screwdrivers or scissors, whatever. I have better knives, I have better screwdrivers, and I have better scissors, but I don't use them as much as this. And the reason being that, well, it's more versatile. I just have to carry one thing that does everything, and that's just the saying, jack of all trades, master of none. It's not because it's the best, but it's because it does everything. Now, if we're going back to cameras, this is pretty much what the E-M1 Mark II is. Hello everyone, welcome back to Uncertain Release, and today we're going to talk about the Olympus E-M1 Mark II. This is a camera that I bought a couple of months ago, about 4 months ago, at the end of May, pretty much. And initially I didn't want it to be anything more than just a good autofocus replacement for my EM5 Mark II, but it ended up being a lot more than that. But before we get into the details and specifics about this camera when it comes to the specs and the use, in 2025 we need to go back to 2016, the year that this camera was released. So the E-M1 Mark II was released in December 2016, so almost 2017 technically, until people first got their hands on it. And it was released at a pretty staggering price of $2,000, which, doesn't sound like a super weird price to know nowadays, right? But we need to take care of inflation. So with inflation taken in account in 2025, $2,000 in 2016, that's about $2,700 today, which for a Mark IV third camera, even if it's the flagship, is a lot of money. I remember last year when the E-M1 Mark II got released and there was like a $400 increase from the original EM1, going from $2,000 to $2,400. Everybody moaned at it, but like it was too expensive. Man, the E-M1 Mark II was more expensive than that, technically, comparatively, back in 2016. So that's an extremely expensive camera. That was an extremely expensive camera. And from the mouth of the Olympus CEO from the time himself, the camera was over-engineered. They over-engineered the shit out of that camera body to put everything that they had in it. It had a new processor, a brand new sensor, new autofocus system, new IBIS, and a whole bunch of new technology that we've never seen before in Mark IV cameras. But we've never seen this implementation, because the fact of the matter is, the EM1 Mark II did not really bring anything that wasn't already there in Mark IV ecosystem at this point. It wasn't the first camera to have a large grip. Obviously, it wasn't the first camera to have a 20 megapixel sensor. The PNF and the GX8 took care of that earlier in 2016. It wasn't the first camera to have a good weather sealing or a large EVF. It wasn't the first camera to have 10 frames per second mechanical shooting, for example. It wasn't even the first camera to have phase detection autofocus. That was the EM1 Mark I back in 2013. And of course, it wasn't the first camera to have 4K video. However, it was the first Olympus camera to have 4K video, and across all the Mark IV third cameras, it was the first one to have dual card slots, which wouldn't stand for much longer because the GH5 is just 3 months away at this point, but still. The thing with the EM1 Mark II is that when it was released, it was touted as that very expensive professional tool, and as such, it needed to, first of all, look and feel the part, which I think, in my opinion, it does, but most importantly, it needed to be supported. You cannot just release a tool and not decide to fix the issues with it or the problems with it that you can fix, because if there are professional shooters shooting with their camera like this, they will report them, they will complain about it, and if it's too significant, they will actually change systems, because for a professional shooter, having your camera work properly is pretty important in general. So the fact is that the E-M1 Mark II got tremendous firmware support up to like 2020 or so. And in 2019, the E-M1 Mark II received its most significant firmware update, which was basically putting it on par with the E-M1X, save for a few features like handheld high-res and like the subject detection autofocus system. But the autofocus algorithms were put into the E-M1 Mark II, the new 4K log video profiles were put into the E-M1 Mark II, the autofocus was improved in a lot of ways. There were a lot of things that were added on that camera over the time, and by 2020, when the E-M1 Mark III released, the E-M1 Mark II was not the same camera, and in fact, the upgrade going from the E-M1 Mark II to the E-M1 Mark III was not significant enough for most people, which is why the E-M1 Mark III didn't really sell well. So, okay, that's the context of the E-M1 Mark II. What is it to use in 2025? Because that camera is close to be 10 years old. Next year, next December, it will be a decade old. And, as electronics go, a decade is pretty old for just a simple device like this. So, let's start with the basics, okay? Sensor performance. The E-M1 Mark II has the IMX272 sensor, I think it was, which is a slight upgrade over the IMX269 sensor that was in the Pen F before. So we have a 20 megapixel resolution, and we have, compared to that previous 20 megapixel chip in the Pen F, we have stuff like better dynamic range, lower noise levels, and of course, phase detection. So the image quality of the E-M1 Mark II, in my opinion, is more than good enough. If you have concerns about Mark IV third's image quality, I really don't think that those concerns are valid. Because, well, first of all, if you look at older Mark IV third cameras like this E-M5 Mark II that has a 16 megapixel sensor, you could find cracks in the image quality, I guess, especially in high ISO territories, but I've been using both of those cameras side by side, and the difference between the E-M1 Mark II and the E-M5 Mark II when it comes to high ISO is pretty significant, to the point that I have been shooting low light events with the E-M1 Mark II and never really felt like I was limited in taking what was in front of me. When I put the images back on the computer later, I was more than satisfied with the noise levels. It's pretty similar to what I'm used to with my X Pro 2, which has an APS-C 24 megapixel sensor, and same sensor as the X-T2 and everything that I used before. So really, it wasn't significantly worse or better than those Fujifilm cameras that I used in the past, and I was pretty happy about that because that meant that the camera was plenty usable when it comes to image quality. Now, if you want to get into more specific things like landscape, yeah, the Mark IV third sensor will not have the same dynamic range as a full-frame chip, and it will not have the same resolution as a high-resolution full-frame chip either. On the other hand, the E-M1 Mark II has the same pixel shift technology as the E-M5 Mark II, for example, and that specific thing allows, if you have a studded tripod that is, allows the E-M1 Mark II to bump up the resolution from 20 to 80 megapixels, which is pretty interesting. And the fact, of combining several images allows a pretty drastic reduction in noise and a pretty drastic increase in dynamic range, about 2 stops on both fronts, which basically brings the image on par with high-resolution full-frame bodies, in my opinion. So you have the caveat that you need a tripod, sure, but it's pretty okay in my opinion. That's a good trade-off considering the camera is much smaller, much less expensive than the high-res full-frame body, and the lenses are also smaller, lighter, and cheaper. So that's the nice part about, some stuff like event work and landscape work. It works fine. Now, for other stuff like sports and action, the sensor has pretty nice autofocus and it has very good burst rates. So let's talk about the autofocus first. The autofocus is very much like the autofocus out of an older mirrorless camera. So you don't have much in terms of subject detection. You have face and eye tracking, of course, but it's not the most reliable thing in the world. However, you do have face detection points all across the sensor. You have a 121 points, if I'm remembering correctly, and those points are pretty accurate and they're pretty fast. So even though the E-M1 Mark II is not the most automated camera in existence, it's still more than accurate and fast enough to track moving subjects, even fast ones. And I found that, like, the small zones or single point are the most reliable focus modes on that camera, and that's pretty much the same thing as my Nikon Z6 right there. The Z6 that I'm shooting this video on, which is my main camera at the moment, has also a tracking box mode, which is pretty reliable, but not always. The tracking box mode, because it has one on the M1 Mark II, is not reliable, and I wouldn't recommend that you use that. So that's for the autofocus. To me, it's fine. I can see cracks in a full burst or a few shots that are out of focus, but I've been able to shoot fast-moving subjects like an air show, planes coming right at me, or sports and action with like pets, dogs running at full speed or whatever, and it was fine. I didn't have much of a problem with it. It was not as good as my Z6 on the hit rate. I would say my Z6 I would get, I don't know, 9 out of 10 shots in a burst that were in focus. With the M1 II, it was more like 7 or 8, so you have more like trash images that you have to put down, but other than that, the camera was performing well. On the burst rate front, though, this is where the M1 Mark II is, in my opinion, a really great camera today, because it allows you to shoot with very high burst rates without spending a ton of money. So let's start with the mechanical shutter burst rates, because I think that this is what most people would gravitate towards. If you want continuous autofocus with it, you are limited to 10 frames per second, which is fine. Honestly, it's okay. I've been doing most of my work involving bursts and action shooting with that mode, and it's pretty reliable. You have a pretty large buffer with it. You have, I think, 80 frames in the buffer, which clears fairly quickly, so that's good. And it works fine. It's not the fastest in the world, of course. Technically, my Z6 is faster than the M1 Mark II because it can shoot up to 12 frames per second. But that's in that same ballpark when it comes to burst rate, and I think there's not that much of a difference between the two cameras shooting a mechanical shutter. Now, if you go into locked focus, so AFS, you will be able to push that shutter to 15 frames per second, which is pretty impressive and can have its uses, but honestly, I don't remember the last time I used it. It's nice to have it, if you ever want it, but I wouldn't really use it for much. Now, let's talk about the electronic shutter, because this is where the camera really put in the fifth, I would say. So if you still want that continuous autofocus, you will have the ability to shoot up to 18 frames per second, which is honestly pretty nice. 18 frames per second, that means that you are in speeding distance of cameras like the Nikon Z6 III or the Nikon Z8. Any camera shooting like 20 frames per second, think the Canon R6, or if we want to be pedantic and want to have uncompressed RAWs, even something like a Sony A1. But, I mean, those cameras are not in the same category as the E-M1 Mark II, of course, they're not, but that's just to put things in perspective. The 18 frames per second mode, so with electronic shutter, I found I didn't have much of a difference in terms of autofocus accuracy between those two modes, between the mechanical shutter and the electronic shutter. It was basically the same thing. And the nice thing that I realized with the E-M1 II is that, okay, we don't have blackout-free shooting, but we don't have the slideshow mode. So technically, on my Z6, if I want to shoot a burst of like 9 or 12 frames per second, depending on the bitrate, I will have a slideshow mode. What I mean by that is that the previous frame that has been taken by the camera is the one that is being displayed in the viewfinder, while the current frame is being shot. So we don't have like that blackout thing like we did with DSLRs, but at the same time we have a delayed view, and the slower the shutter speed, the slower the burst rate, the more delayed the view is. And so that's a little bit problematic for action shooting, because typically I shot an air show with my Z6 last year. I shot the same air show this year with the E-M1 Mark II, and I was able to compare the two experiences by the fact that with the Z6 shooting at 12 frames per second, I'm able to track decently well, but I'm always correcting on and overcompensating. So the subject, there's this in the frame constantly throughout the burst, because I think I'm tracking it correctly, then I realize I'm not tracking it correctly because I'm not having the correct view inside my viewfinder, which is problematic, I would say. It wasn't much of a problem to me because I had the correct focus modes and everything. But for someone that's not used to it, it could be a problem. Now, with the E-M1 Mark II, I was able to go around that because we don't have blackout free shooting, but we have live view, like correct live view. When the image is taken, it goes black, then it goes back up. We don't have a slideshow. So it's much more like a DSLR, but at much faster speeds, like 18 frames per second. So that's good. Even in electronic shutter mode, you have that blackout. And that's something that I think allowed me to keep my subject in the center of my frame a lot more, if not in the center of my frame, within my focus points, which is the most important thing. Speaking of the electronic shutter, I felt like the rolling shutter effect of that sensor wasn't too pronounced, like it's about 1/60th of a second, which is pretty fast, all things considered. It's normal, it's a smaller Micro Four Thirds chip, but still, it allows to use that 18 frames per second burst rate for action stuff, which is honestly pretty nice. Like, I don't have much of a problem with the rolling shutter effect on that sensor for moving subjects. I would generally just stay with mechanical shutter because I don't need more than 10 frames per second usually, but it's nice to have the option if you need it. And that leads us to, what if you don't need autofocus? Well, if you don't need autofocus and you have a locked focus and you're shooting an electronic shutter, then you can shoot up to 60 frames per second, which is pretty normal since I just said that the sensor has a 1/60th of a second readout speed. But yeah, 60 frames per second in RAW, that's fast. That's very fast. And I cannot think of a few instances that I would have used it, but I'm sure there are a couple of use cases for which having 60 frames per second RAW is a pretty nice advantage. Now, on top of all of those burst features and modes and whatever, the E-M1 Mark II pioneered something that I think people are just discovering now, because suddenly it's been all the buzz around the Sony A9 III and the Sony A1 II, and that's pre-capture. And this is something that has been present in Canon cameras for a while. It has been present in Nikon cameras and JPEG as well. It was present in Panasonic bodies for like a decade or more. But the E-M1 Mark II, as far as I know, is the first camera that did pre-capture in RAW, up to a second or two. We're going to talk about it a bit more, but I think this is the first camera that did it. So basically, what pre-capture is, it starts buffering frames as long as you have your shutter half pressed. And then it keeps a certain number of frames in the buffer that have been taken already until you just fully depress the shutter to take a photo. And then you have a number of photos before you pressed and a number after you pressed. And that way you are sure to always have the correct moment, which is really nice. So you can do it with a locked focus at 60 frames per second. But since you can only hold 35 images maximum in that buffer, it's about a little bit more than a half a second, which is, depends on your reaction time, but it has limited use, in my opinion. On the other hand, if you have a continuous autofocus engaged, you're limited to 18 frames per second, which is, remember, still very fast. And at 18 frames per second, 35 images, that's about 2 seconds. That's one frame short of 2 seconds. So that's very nice. honestly, having 2 seconds of pre-capture time allows you to not only get the right shot for the right moment, but also get something that you might have missed and didn't see in the moment that happened right before the thing that you wanted to photograph, or several things in a row that you did not really have the reaction time for. It's really cool to have it, and I honestly can't believe that this is a feature that is present in a camera that is almost a decade old at this point, because everybody's been talking about it on like cameras that have been released this year or last year for tremendous amount of money. This lowly E-M1 Mark II already had it 10 years ago. That's a bit nuts to me, but anyway. Okay, so we've been talking about autofocus and burst rates and image quality and everything, but I haven't talked about the colors of the sensor, and to be honest, the colors are not anything super special. They are workable, they are really nice overall. They are slightly nicer than the colors on the E-M5 Mark II, which were already pretty nice, but I wouldn't say that they are quite matching the amount of, specialness, I don't know how to really call it, that I have with my Fujifilm cameras, for example, which really do have a special look to them. It's not matching my D700 either. It's something that is very neutral, it's very easy to grade, and honestly, I'm really happy with the color science in this E-M1 Mark II. The skin tones are pretty easy to edit out. It's overall like a non-issue for me. It's not a color science that would be problematic for anyone, I think. It's okay, it's good. It's neutral, it's versatile, it does the job well. Of course, when it comes to image quality, I need to talk about the computational features that Olympus cameras have, and there, I guess we have the exact same suite of stuff as we had with previous Mark IV third cameras, like as I mentioned, pixel shift. I mentioned as well the live composite mode. I used a French word in my previous sentence because language comes back. Anyway, the live composite mode, if you want to know more about it, I made a whole section about the live composite and what it does in my E-M5 Mark II review, if you want to check that out. There's also the live time, live bulk mode, stuff like that. You don't have stuff like live ND, that's just on new Olympus and OM system stuff. But honestly, I liked, while it's cool, and it's nice for landscape photographers and stuff like that, I'm not sure I would use it much. And you can always stick an ND in front of your camera anyway, so there's that. So that's about it when it comes to the photographic specs. Now let's move to the video specs, because that's one of the things that surprised me the most about the E-M1 Mark II is how good of a video camera it is. So let's start with the record modes. It has two flavors of 4K video. There is one flavor which is DCI 4K, which is I think around a 17:9 aspect ratio with a fixed 237 megabits per second bitrate. And this video mode is great. It has plenty of detail, very low compression. It's just heavy files, 237 megabits per second for 8-bit footage. That's a bit excessive, I would say. But overall, it's a nice video. That's what I use mostly. That's what I used in the last 2 or 3 videos, I think, on this channel, because they were filmed on the E-M1 Mark II. And, it's nice quality 4K video. The second flavor of 4K video is the normal, quote-unquote, 16:9 aspect ratio. And unlike the DCI 4K, which is only available in 24 frames per second, here, with that 16:9 crop, it's available in 24, 25, and 30 frames per second if you want to. It has a variable bitrate, so it's not 237 megabits per second. It's varying depending on the compression that is needed in the frame, which, honestly, I'm not the biggest fan of, and the video is still fine. There's no problem with it, but it's not as good of a quality as the DCI 4K video, which is actually pretty cool looking. you can use with those video profiles or modes, I would say, the flat profile, which is what the camera originally shipped with in 2016. That's the same exact profile, color profile that you can find in cameras like the E-M1 Mark II, which it's flat technically, but it's also already graded in a way. And since this is 8-bit footage, you don't have it on the dynamic range in that. It's better than nothing, and I guess early adopters of this camera were okay with it, but they voiced enough complaints that Olympus added the OM log 400 profile with it, within the firmware upgrade of the E-M1X. So that log profile allows the camera to have a bit more dynamic range and have just a lot more flexibility in post when it comes to color grading for the colors and everything like that. So that's a very, very welcome addition. I started with an old firmware on this. I did not really check the firmware version. I started with like flat profile. I didn't really like the video out of it, and the autofocus was all janky. I upgraded to the firmware 3.7 and I had that log video. I had a much better autofocus system, and honestly it transformed that camera for me. So speaking about autofocus, you have face and eye tracking in video, and it works across the whole sensor, of course, because you have face detection across the whole sensor. Meaning that if I want to record a video, it's the same worry-free experience that I'm used to with the Z6 right here, because I can move in the frame and the camera will follow me, unlike my X-H1 or my X-T2 that I was using before, which, well, if I moved a little bit, there was a whole lot of autofocus problems, and that was the most frustrating thing I had. Another thing that is pretty nice when it comes to this camera, when it comes to video, first of all, is the preamps for the microphone. If you know what you're doing, you have a pretty clean sound coming out of it. I currently use a Rode Video Micro, and for that microphone, this is the cleanest sound I've ever got out of that microphone for, across all the cameras that I've had. The closest to this camera was the Fujifilm X-T2, but the moment I switched to the X-H1, I had a lot more hissing sound. Same for the Z6 here. I'm sure we can still hear a bit of it. I'm doing my best in DaVinci to reduce it or remove it, but there was always still some of it creeping up in here, so with that camera, not really needed, and I'm really happy about that. And the next thing is just this. Having a fully articulating screen like that, that's very nice. I really, really like having a screen like that for video, especially for video like this when I'm filming myself. Right now on the Z6, I need to have a mirror on top of my camera with the flip-up screen behind it, like flipped up, so I can see myself in the mirror above the camera, which is not the most practical thing in the world, because in the hot shoe I need to remove the eyepiece to see the screen at all. It's just a bit cumbersome and I don't like it very much. It's a solution, but it's a bit cumbersome. This one, I don't have to worry about it because you have a flip-out screen, which works great. That's good. And yeah, that's pretty much everything there is to say about the video mode when it comes to tripod use like that. But if you want to do run and gun, you have exceptional IBIS in this camera. I didn't really talk about it in the photo section of the specs, but honestly, this is a dope IBIS system. Just quickly for photos, I was able to hold like several seconds of handheld exposures with it. It's absolutely insane how good that IBIS system is. It's even better than the system that was in the E-M5 Mark II, which I already thought was a marvel of engineering. So I'm going to stop glazing the IBIS system of Olympus bodies right now, but you get the idea. In video mode, it's super smooth. I almost have the feeling that I'm shooting on a gimbal, which is very weird, but because I'm not having a gimbal at all, but it's amazing, and honestly for run and gun setups, probably one of the best cameras out there for the money, bar none. So overall, a quick conclusion about the internal capabilities before we move on to the body design and the ergonomics. The capabilities of the E-M1 Mark II really are the capabilities of what I would call a Swiss Army knife camera, because you can do pretty much everything when it comes to photography well enough. You can do pretty much everything when it comes to videography well enough. I would be able to shoot a short film on the E-M1 Mark II, no problem. I would be able to shoot an event, sports, landscapes, whatever. just throw the thing at the camera and it will do fine, really. So that was pretty much everything that I wanted to say when it comes to the internal specs of that camera. Let's now talk about the external aspects of it. So let's start with the ergonomics, build quality, and all of that. Build quality is pretty standard for a flagship Olympus camera, I would say. It's very similar to the E-M5 Mark II in a way that it's pretty much all magnesium alloy body, but you have some plastic parts. Of course, you have the SD card on the side, which is plastic. The buttons are plastic, of course. You have some flaps on the side, which are better than the large flap on the E-M5 Mark II, which was very cumbersome to use. The camera has very nice grips, and the biggest thing about this camera that I like is that large, very contoured grip, which is exceptionally comfortable to use. That very obvious shaping in the grip allows me, even though the camera is smaller than my Z6, it's smaller than my XH1, I can't put my full hand on the grip of my Z6, and I could not do that either on the XH1. I can in here, because the thumb rest is really nicely designed, because the grip itself is very nicely designed and everything. This is the first camera in which is not huge like my D700, but I can put all my fingers on it. I don't have my pinky dangling under the camera, requiring me to put a plate under the camera like it's the case on my Z6. This is a breeze to use. It's really a very comfortable camera. Button-wise, you have a lot going on. You have two front function buttons. You have two buttons on the top plate here. You have two very nicely designed and execution, I would say, dials. You know, like those are probably one of the nicest dials I've used, because they're not crunchy when you turn them. The steps are well defined but not hard to turn. They are made of metal, and they turn very smoothly, and I really like using these dials as well. You have a mode 1-2 switch in the back, and just like on the E-M5 Mark II, sorry, I set that up to photo video switch, so I don't have to move my mode dial, because on the E-M5 II, the video mode is right above the manual exposure setting, which is nice. But here we have the C1, C2, and C3 on the mode dial, so if I want to go into video, I have to do like 5 dial movements, which is a bit annoying. So here I just do that little switch thing, which is very nice, and it works fine. The only thing that this camera would lack, I would say, would be an autofocus joystick, and this is something that has been fixed with the E-M1 Mark III, which the info button just got moved over there, and they put a joystick in this place. It's not a huge problem with the E-M1 Mark II anyway, because you have that touchscreen in the back, and when you have your eye up to the viewfinder, you can use the touchscreen with your thumb as a touchpad. So it's not a huge problem, in my opinion. I was a bit sad to see that there was no joystick in that camera, and I was like, okay, I'm back to doing like D-pad movement but no, you can use the touchscreen in the back to control your autofocus system, which is cool, which I like, and it works fine, honestly. The only thing that I'm not the biggest fan of, okay, I'm going to list a few things. First of all, the display quality and the EVF quality are not the best I've used. First of all, the EVF is the exact same EVF that you would find in the E-M5 Mark II, so not OLED, 2.36 million dots. I think it's 60 Hz. I need to confirm that. It will be shown here if I was wrong or not, but it's fine for what I'm using for what I'm using it for. But the focus accuracy is not exactly super visible in the viewfinder. So sometimes you take a shot, you think it's in focus, you chimp at the back or in the EVF, but in display mode, and you realize that the critical sharpness just isn't there because it was moving. The camera within the burst did not grab the thing correctly, and you did not see that in the viewfinder. Whereas on my Z6, for example, which has a much better, larger, higher resolution OLED 3.6869 million dot EVF, it's much easier to see, and I don't have that problem with the Z6, so that's something to keep in mind. And same thing goes for the back screen. It's, I think, just over 1,000,000 dots, which is not bad at all, actually. But it's not the same kind of resolution I'm getting with my Z6. My Z6 has a very nice 2.1 million dot display in the back, which is very bright as well. This is not as bright. And it's not a problem. I'm used to these kind of displays. I've had them for years at this point. But, it's nice to have a nice, high quality, higher end display on your camera. And I've had that with the Z6, don't have that with the E-M1 Mark II. Not the biggest deal in the world, but just something I thought I would talk about. When it comes to other things, you have on the bottom contacts for an HLD9 grip. I don't have it. I want to get it, but I cannot find one at a good price, so maybe I'll talk about it in a future video. But yeah, you can put a Velcro grip on that camera. However, this is not the kind of booster grip that you would see in Fujifilm, where the grip is needed for like video record times and burst rates and whatever. Just here, it's just battery life and ergonomics. And since I don't feel the need to add anything under the camera right now, I don't really care. And battery life wise, the camera is pretty good. It has, compared to the E-M1 from 2013 and compared to the E-M5 from 2015, I'm talking about the E-M5 too, by the way, which used both the same battery, which was the BLN1, which is pretty small battery, does not last long. The E-M1 2 uses the BLH1 battery, which is pretty large actually, and pretty good. When I shot my air show last week, I shot, I think, about 2,000 images across 3 or 4 hours, and I was at 60% at the end of it, with a fresh battery at the start. So no, that's not true. I shot some pictures at the beginning of the day, but still, I was at 60% at the end of the event, and I was like, okay, that's cool. If I was using the XH1 for the same thing, I think for like the same event 2 years ago, which I had the XH1 for that, I had to do like 2 to 3 battery changes for the same amount of shots, about 2,000, 2,200 around those lines. And the same thing happened kind of with the Z6, which had a much larger battery, but I had to change it once last year. Here, didn't have to do that at all. So, good battery life. The only problem with that battery type, the BLH1 specifically, is that there are only 3 cameras that ever used it. The E-M1 Mark II, the E-M1X, and the E-M1 Mark III. For the OM1, released in 2022, they used a new battery type, which is the BLX1, which is more like a rounder battery, which is much closer to what is using, what is being used in like the modern Lumix cameras, for example, like the BLK22. I have the same kind of shape, but yeah, it's not the square battery that is in the M1 or the M1 and these 3 cameras with the M1X are the only cameras that will ever use these battery types. So since they are all discontinued now, it might be hard to find batteries in the future for those cameras unless you go for third-party batteries, which I'm willing to do. Honestly, it's not that big of a deal. So yeah, that's about all I wanted to say about the ergonomics. Overall, the camera is very free of problems, I would say. I don't have much problems with the ergonomics of that camera the way I have with most other cameras. The mode dial is positioned in a really nice place. We have 3 custom modes on the mode dial, which I really like. Maybe the only other complaint I would have would be the fact that we have the power switch on the left side of the camera, which I would like to have it on the right side, just to use one-handed. But honestly, I got used to that pretty quickly because, well, this is my 3rd Olympus camera. I have the M5 Mark II, the M10 Mark II, and now the M1 Mark II, and they all have their power buttons on the left side. Honestly, it's just a matter of habit at some point. And even if that was that big of a problem, I can always use the mode 1-2 switch in the back to act as a power switch. So honestly, not that big of a deal. Last thing I want to talk about regarding the E-M1 Mark II specifically are the lenses. When I talked about the E-M5 Mark II in the review of that camera last year, I talk about that camera because, well, I wanted a small system. So with that small camera, I got small lenses like this 45 1.8, this 14 f2.5, and those are lenses that go very well on the EM5 too. However, the EM1 Mark II opens the door to larger lenses, and not only larger lenses but like higher quality lenses. So my main, let me grab them. My main zoom lens with my main best Mark IV third camera was the EM5 Mark II. My longest lens was this. That's the 35-100. It's a collapsible small zoom lens, and it's a nice zoom, right? When I got the EM1 Mark II, I took the opportunity to have, a large grip that allows for larger lenses, to buy a lens that I've been wanting to get for a long time, which is 150-600 equivalent in the form of the 75-300. This is an amazing lens. It's very sharp, it's pretty small, it's pretty light, and for example, for the air show that I shot last week, it was such a nice lens to shoot with compared to the lens I was using 2 years before, which were my Sigma 100-400 for f-mount, which weighs more than a kilogram by itself. Then you have to add a camera behind it, and you have like more than a 2 kilogram setup at the end of the day. It wasn't really super amazing to shoot with, and with the EM1 Mark II, it's a very manageable size. Like, it's not too big, it's not too heavy. The grip is excellent, so even if that's my longest and biggest Mark IV third lens, it's still not very huge. It's about the same size as my 55-200mm kit zoom from my Nikon D60, and the image quality from that lens is actually much better. The aperture is not that much different, but the autofocus is faster, the images are sharper, and the lens is overall a very good match for the EM1 Mark II. But that's not the only large-ish lens that I got, and I got very exceptionally good deal on an OM System 12-40 f2.8, which I got for under $400, which is really, really very, very nice. And let me tell you, bit of dust on the blurry element. Let me tell you that lens on the EM1 Mark II is joy to shoot with. Not only is it stupid sharp, like really stupid sharp, it's built like a fucking tank. Like, first of all, we have the best weather sealing possible in the Mark IV third lens, which is always nice to see. The EM1 Mark II is weather sealed as well, so I'm not really bothered to take that in the rain. We have a full metal construction, constant f2.8 aperture across the range, and we have probably my favorite feature with it, a fucking focus clutch. And when you have that focus clutch, you can do nice things for video, like, I don't know, zoom in with a parafocal lens. That's super fucking nice. Anyway, this is probably one of my best lenses of any system, really, when it comes to sharpness, overall image quality, build quality, and ease of use. And I'm really happy to have that EM1 Mark II to be able to explore those larger Mark IV third lenses, because for the price and the size of that 12-40 f2.8, man, I don't see a lot of competition elsewhere. Really, really don't. Anyway, that was the lenses side of the video. But now I just want to finally talk about the value and, conclude a little bit when it comes to this camera. So, just one last thing before we go into the conclusion. Some lenses might not have all the functionality that you would expect from the EM1 Mark II. Basically, if you want to get a Lumix lens, for example, you will not have the ability to shoot in Pro Cap L mode, which is the 18 frames per second Pro capture mode. You will be locked into the single focus Pro Cap H at 60 frames per second, but you would not have continuous autofocus in that mode, which is a bit annoying. Same thing for stuff like focus stacking, which is extremely practical on some of those Olympus cameras to have for like some low effort macro work. Really, 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 really nice to have that stacking in camera. Invaluable. But with the Lumix lenses, you won't have that. And even with some Olympus lenses, you won't have that because you have a specific list of Olympus cameras and lenses that are compatible for the focus stacking thing. And not all lenses and cameras are compatible with it. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, conclusion, and let's talk a little bit about value. So the E-M1 was released as kind of a ridiculously priced camera back in 2016, but the usual used price of that camera is pretty low. I got that camera with two UHS-2 Lexar 128GB cards and a second battery for $415 back in late May of this year. So the price of this camera is well under $400, and for under $400, man, this is amazing. I don't have the words right now to describe how good that camera is for that kind of money. It's just incredibly good. To put that into perspective, my Z6 right now, which has a better sensor but not better video, not better autofocus, worse burst rates, not as good IBIS, not dual cut slots, worse battery life, better EVF and back screen but not full electric screen, worse preamps for Mac phones. That camera, which is still very good and amazing camera, cost me twice the money. It cost me $720 back in late 2023. So just to put things in perspective, in context, this E-M1 Mark II, for the performance, for what it gives you, it's extremely cheap. And you can sometimes find it for like barely over $400. The usual price is around 450 euros, up to 500 for those are very, very, very clean. I was able to find one that's decently clean with a low shutter count for that 415 price, so that's good. But I really wanted to look at other cameras that would be comparable to this. And to me there are a few, so I'm looking for high-end crop sensor cameras that are kind of fast with good video, and we have like the Fujifilm X-H1. It's like 50 to 100% more expensive than the E-M1 Mark II, so out. There is the Lumix G9, which is about 30% more expensive in average in France, and I don't know for the rest of Europe or outside of Europe, but it's a bit more expensive here, and we don't have the phase detection autofocus. We have better video, we have better ergonomics, better viewfinder, stuff like that, but we don't have phase detection autofocus, and though we have that DFD focus system, I'm not super confident in the performance that it has, especially for fast-moving subjects, and I've never really heard anyone talk about the G9 as a goated wildlife or sports camera. So, there's that. Maybe I will buy a G9 one day and see for myself, but I would probably go for the E-M1 Mark II instead, and it's cheaper, so there you have it. But yeah, to come back to the very first point I made in this video, the E-M1 Mark II not only is cheap, really nice to handle, has great specs, but it can do pretty much everything I want a camera to do, from any photographic instance to all the videographic instances that I would find myself in for like short films, family video, travel stuff, and those YouTube things that I'm doing. And honestly, it checks all the boxes that I want in a camera. And on top of that, it has access to probably my favorite lens system at the moment, with like those small, inexpensive, small prime lenses with like those amazing little zoom lenses. Honestly, the Mark IV Thirds, I'm going to make a video about Mark IV Thirds as a whole, as a system, because I think there's a lot to talk about, a lot of things that people may not be aware of. And yeah, the M1 Mark II pushed me over the edge to switch to Mark IV Thirds for most of my photography and videography. The Z6 right now is way less utilized compared to what it was a year ago, for sure. So yeah, that's about the end of this video. If you liked it, well, leave a comment, tell me if you didn't like it as well, if I would need to change something. And on that note, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.